ones who have come here. We are going to hold the Professor Athar Ali Memorial Lecture. We are sorry for the last 2 years because of the corona lockdown. We were unable to continue or to hold this lecture. I feel very happy that Athar Sahab's family members of the family have found time and are present with us. That rather gives us a great encouragement. For today's speaker, Professor Harbans Mukhia, hardly needs any introduction to a gathering of medieval Indian historians. But for the sake of our younger friends present here, I will request Professor Nadeem Rezavi, Treasurer of the Aligarh Historians Society, to introduce him to our younger friends. Nadeem, please.
With the job of introducing someone with whom all of us are aware about. As Professor Moosvi just pointed out, there is hardly any historian, what to talk about historian of medieval India, who doesn't know about Harbans Mukhia ji. Howsoever, let me just point out one or two things. One, that today Professor Mukhia is not only one of the well-known historians of medieval Indian history, but is one of those who has been, fighting against the rising communal trends in history. In fact, he is one of the crusaders against the communal and communal politics which are prevalent today. Not only this, I would like to remind that at JNU, when the protests were going on and a number of lectures were organized to talk on nationalism, he was one of those prominent historians who was there very prominently. In fact, Romila Thapar has written that there are two dinosaurs of JNU who were leading from the front, and one of them was Mukhia ji himself, and of course the other one was Professor Romila Thapar. His crusade, in fact, starts back around 1968. It's not something which he started only yesterday. He, along with Romila Thapar and Bipan Chandra, contributed to the development of a booklet, Communalism and the Writing of Indian History, way back in 1969. Although in the earlier years, because he had done research on historiography, so who amongst us is unaware about his work, historians and historiography during the reign of Akbar? Almost all the students of history have been studying, this is one of the base books on which they depend to write about the Indian historiography, especially the historiography of the medieval period, the historians of the medieval period. And then, how can one forget, and as I said that I am talking for the young students out here, his work, Was There Feudalism in Indian History? That small article which he had contributed led to a very strong debate. And this had been published a number of times. Basically, it was a presidential address to the medieval Indian section of the Indian History Congress, one of the organizations which, like him, have been at the forefront of, fight against communalism. So there, as one of the sectional presidents, he had written this article. And then this very article was published 2 years later in the Journal of Peasant Studies. And then it became one of the issues of the international debate. A book, Feudalism and Non-European Societies, published in 1985, co-edited by Mukhia ji along with T.J. Byers, also has a developed version of the same issue: was there feudalism in India or not? And then, of course, we have in 2000 a final version of this debate, the feudal debate. So, remember that his contributions which were there. And then, of course, he was one of the first among the Indian historians to introduce the school of the annal schools of history, when he, along with certain other colleagues of his, for example, the co-editor along with him was Maurice Hemmard, and French Studies in History were published in 2 volumes, which introduced the concept of the annal school and its applicability to the Indian situation. In 1993, Perspectives on Medieval History was published by Vikas in New Delhi. In 1996, Religion, Religiosity and Communalism, which was co-edited by him along with Praful Bidwai and Achin Vinayak. It was published by Manohar. And then, of course, the very famous, although just a textbook, The Mughals of India. It's a very brief work, but one of those which every student of medieval history should go through. His collections of articles, one collection of articles which appeared is Issues in Indian History, Politics and Society, published in 2009. And there is one another field which I would like to mention regarding Professor Mukhia, and that is his book, History of Technology, Volume 2, which was published by INSA, and it is one of those works in which a large number of topics dealing with scientific developments of the past of Indian history have been included. I personally feel honored that one of my papers was also published in the same volume, and of course Ishrat Alam Saab, a number of papers of his have also been included. He is also the founder editor. He is the founder editor of the journal published by Sage, the Medieval History Journal, which is one of the major journals which is coming out as far as Indian history, especially so of medieval India, is concerned. He has had a large number of awards, and I don't have. I think I have taken enough of your time. I must only say that Mukhia ji is one of those who is internationally famous. In fact, his involvement with French institutions have been quite great, and he was also a fellow at Paris. He was a visiting professor at the British Academy. He was a senior fellow at the International Institute of Asian Studies, Leiden. He is a fellow at the University of Amsterdam, so on and so forth. With these, brief comments on a person who has done much as far as the field of history is concerned, I welcome him to our function. to deliver the M. Athar Ali Memorial Lecture. Thank you very much.
To say a few words or introduce Professor M. Athar Ali, in whose memory we are holding this lecture today, briefly.
That Professor Mukhia has agreed to deliver the memorial lecture for this year. There is a sheet which gives details about Professor Athar Ali. I would only like to say a few words in addition. First of all, he was almost a total Aligarh product, although his school education had not been at Aligarh. And I was very fortunate to have him as my class fellow from first year onwards to our doing MA together. Of course, he's known for his research in history. I would particularly argue that it was in his nobility under Aurangzeb that the statistical method was used to the full extent. A similar amount of industry, and also, of course, along with industry, judgment and discretion, are at work in his other major work, and that was Apparatus of Empire, in which he worked out all the appointments and postings of the Mughal officialdom from the time of Akbar to the end of Shah Jahan's reign. He was in fact engaged in a similar work for Aurangzeb's reign when the detection of cancer separated us from him in 1998. I don't know if at any time a school called Aligarh School of History existed. We are told by some historians it did. But if it did, Professor Athar Ali was certainly a major figure of it. And I should also say at the end that although, and these were points of differences between us, how far and how do we go in recognizing or appreciating the effect of Islam on Indian history? It's a theme which has to be dealt with great care, not like a lawyer, but like a judge. And I think in this sphere also, Professor Athar Ali is remarkable. He maintains his balance and judgment in discussing these matters where partisanship so often reigns. For all these reasons, setting apart his personal virtues, from which I, among other colleagues, always benefited, it is very important to remember him and his work, because when we sit down to study history, it is people like Professor Athar Ali who should help us to keep our balance and to motivate us towards industry. I am therefore very happy that on this occasion so many of the faculty of the university and particularly students are present. I am sure that we will greatly benefit from Professor Mukhia's lecture, and for the moment I don't want to stand between him and you. Thank you.
Has been a long time, very long time friend and comrade and Karma, who has been a kind of guiding light to all of us who have been studying medieval Indian history. It's a very great honor for me to be invited to deliver this lecture in memory of Athar Sahab under the chair of when Professor Irfan Habib is chairing it. Thank you very much for agreeing, Professor Habib, to chair this. Thank you very much, Professor Shireen Moosvi and Nadeem Rezavi Sahab, for inviting me to deliver this lecture. Athar Sahab, apart from being a very eminent historian of whatever school, Aligarh or any other, he was also very, I also have great personal memories from him. As a research student after my graduation from Delhi University, we are living in the present time, we are living in the modern times. There was no value judgment attached to the word modern. It was a descriptive term. But in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, post Renaissance and Reformation and so on and so forth, the term modern came to acquire a value judgment. Modern was rational. Modern was progressive. Modern led to science, etc., etc. So it became a value judgment. It wasn't a descriptive term, but a value term. So Europe became modern in terms of being rational and being progressive and so on and so forth. And therefore, the medieval became irrational. Medieval became unmodern. So medieval is not defined in its own terms. Medieval is defined in terms of what it is not. Namely, medieval is unmodern. Medieval is even anti-modern, if you like. So that there is a kind of derogatory, very clearly derogatory meaning attached to the term medieval, which is still used. Oh, how medieval his mind is, he beats his wife. We use that medieval term in that derogatory way even now, because that has been attached to it. It is irrational. Medieval is irrational. Medieval is religious. Medieval is superstitious, etc., etc. So medieval by itself has acquired these attributes of being the opposite of modern, the other of modern. Medieval, as I said, it hasn't its own understanding, its own definition, its own attribute. It's the other of modern. Now, so Europe becomes modern, the rest of the world remains medieval, and therefore the Europe must go and bring the rest of the world into the modern world. I mean, right up to the 2000s, it was just given that modernity is given to us by Europe. Modernity is the terms of modernity are what Europe has defined. The modernity is a gift of Europe to the world. As Chris Bailey had put it, modernity was out there. It was out there. Everybody could see. There was no doubt about modernity being European. He's not upholding this. He's just stating that modernity was out there. Everybody could see. There was no dispute about modernity. Modernity is what Europe has given, and modernity is what has made the world modern that we live in. Modernity is rational, this, that, and that. Now, so Europe must bring this modernity to the rest of the medieval world, and therefore Europe went out and expanded itself into the rest of the world, and through colonialism made them modern and so on and so forth. So colonialism was essential, was inescapable for bringing modernity to the rest of the world. That was the logic. In India, it came as a double whammy. It did not merely, the term ancient medieval or the division ancient medieval and modern did not even come as ancient medieval modern. It came as Hindu, Muslim and British period, by James Mill. James Mill, the term ancient, medieval and modern is used for the first time in 1903. But again in the same sense as Hindu, Muslim and period, except that the Stanley Lampoon uses this term for the first time in 1903. But the meaning is the same. So it came to us. So here there is a double equation. The equation is medieval, not only backward and irrational and so on and so forth. It's also Muslim in India. So an equation came to be established between Muslim period of Indian history and its irrationality, and not the medieval period of Indian history, but the Muslim period of Indian history as backward and irrational, and Hindus and Muslims you study in terms of class as a new category. And I'm very, very honored, we are very, very honored to say that one of the masters who made this transformation is still sitting amongst us and guiding us, Professor Irfan Habib. So that class became the new category of analysis rather than religious, and therefore the whole thing changed. The whole thing, peasantry was not Hindu or Muslim peasantry. Ruling class was not, didn't matter whether Akbar was liberal or Aurangzeb was orthodox or dogmatic or what. It didn't matter at all. It's a question of class, ruling class, and the exploiting class and the exploited class. A different category of analysis, different transformation of the very perspective of history, how you look at history. That transformation came in the 1950s and 60s and so on. So that was one major change at the entry point itself, and therefore once the entry point was opened from one to another, then floodgates were released. Then every kind of expansion took place, not necessarily based on class, in fact sometimes quite contrary to based on class, but nonetheless every kind of expansion of themes, expansion of perspectives, expansion of methodologies, expansion of databases. We were so far based primarily on court chronicles and European travelers and so on. Fantastic range of databases opened up. And the 1980s, particularly 1990s and 2000s and the 21st century, it's phenomenal, it's mind-boggling how the themes of historical research have changed. Ecology, history of deserts, history of rains, history of rivers, history of migrations. Migrations is probably the oldest phenomenon of human history. Migrations have taken place long before not only the history, but anything about any notion of the past began. Migrations were there. So that history of migrations, which is history of women, history of gender relations, history of sexuality, of Dalits, and so on and so forth. History of the local deities, not merely Hinduism and Islam in its biggest form, but local deities. Every village has its own deity, which gives you a different picture of the religion of that, or the overall Hinduism, yes, but within Hinduism, a different kind of Hinduism, and so on and so forth. And you can literature as history, not literature as a source of history, but literature as history. Literature itself gives you an image of the past. Paintings themselves give you an image of the past. So it's a phenomenon, as I said, mind-boggling notions of interpersonal relations, notions of space, notions of time. All of these are, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, they have opened up such enormous spaces for history, such great expansion of spaces for history, that people of my generation feel very envious that these things could never occur to us. These things are that the younger generation is now carrying on. Fantastic research, fantastic exploration, absolutely fascinating exploration. Therefore, a great deal of complete transformation of colonized history that we had inherited over 150, 200 years, that has been transformed completely. And yet now it has been transformed by this great transformation, great expansion, which has no space for Hindu and Muslim and Hindu and Muslim operations on Hindu and Hindu resistance. Nobody does this kind of research anywhere. But there is this great regime of ours, present regime of ours, which is determined to bring us back to James Mill. Just forget about everything that has happened after James Mill. Go back to Hindu and Muslim. There is nothing left in history. There is no other consideration in history left except Hindu and Muslim, and of course their enmity and their hostility and so on and so forth. Go back to that. The present regime is determined to take us back to James Mill, back to recolonize history as it was. But having said that, let me say that the profession of history is still secure. The students of history and the teachers of history and the researchers of history, they have not been affected by, I'm talking of undergraduate students. Undergraduate students, postgraduate, one is constantly in contact with them in one way or the other by giving them lectures or in some other ways, many ways. The students, even from the undergraduate level onwards, they have not been affected by this kind of recolonization, this kind of impact of the regime or impact of the WhatsApp university or social media. With them, the discipline of history is still secure. Its integrity is still secure. But then, and the regime knows about it. I'm sure they know about it. But then, regime's calculation is, okay, we'll give them very poisonous kind of history up to the class 10 or maybe 12th. And out of this class 10th or 12th, 2% of the students will go to study history. They will study good history, scientific history, etc., etc. The rest of them, 98%, will still carry whatever we have fed them through school books and so on and so forth. That is their calculation, and I think that is what is worrying about it. I am sure that history as a discipline is not under threat, but what is under threat is our society, which is being molded in a kind of history that we have left behind long. Thank you very much.
Mukhia Sahib is also an Urdu poet. Which he conceals, but I know of. As far as the theme of the lecture is concerned, I think we have had a very comprehensive discussion of the various streams, the past, which have gone into the creation of the methodology of history. And I don't have to say much about that. But I would like to begin with the remarks at the end. It's true that school textbooks have been changed in history, and they have been vitally changed. I remember some time back when we didn't have the present party's government in Uttar Pradesh, a burqa-clad young lady met me and said that I have a problem. I said, what is your problem? She said that I am in the education department. And the research topic that was given to me was communalism in the high school syllabus. But I've been looking at the high school syllabus of UP and textbooks and saying there is no communalism. That was Samajwadi Party and government at that time. where Muslims were appointed as Urdu teachers, although they didn't know Urdu, but they had Muslim names. So there has been such a government in the state. But now, of course, the whole thing is communalized. But I respectfully differ on whether this communalization has not now been applied in university level teaching also. In fact, the UGC has prescribed a syllabus in which the caste system is attributed to Muslims. That when the Muslims came, the caste system came as a kind of defensive mechanism. And all Indians are said to belong to the pure Aryan race. There's a racial theory embedded in this syllabus, which will in fact put Nazis to shame, because it said that there is an Aryan race and they all went out of India, as Nazis said that the Aryans went out of Germany. They forget that the word Arya is used both in India and Iran, but for respectable people. And according to Brahmanical scriptures, only Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are Aryas. Shudras and other classes are not Aryas. And of course, this rules out the Dravidians. And we are now, from the archaeological survey onwards, trying to convert the Indus civilization into an Aryan civilization, so that the Dravidians are driven away from the Indus civilization. So it has gone into archaeology also. Now we have Saraswati Sindhu civilization, not Harappan civilization, as the official name of the Indus civilization. I would like to say that in history,